Good morning. I want to begin by offering a word of thanks and gratitude for our staff. I want to start with Tilly. I am especially grateful for her role as guest proclaimer last week, not only for the good and powerful words that she offered to our congregation, but to the rest that afforded me in the prior week. I want to thank all of our staff for their hard work, not only in the preparation and leadership of today's service, but also in all of the hard, unseen work that they've been doing to further our weekly activities and communications. I want to, as always, thank Hillary and Irina for their beautiful music. It continues to get better and better each week, and I'm so grateful for the resiliency of both of you. Even though you're not able to be in here in the meeting house with a full choir and with instruments and sound at your disposal, or an audience to hear you in real time, you have both been just so phenomenal and easy to work with. So thank you for your continued dedication to our music ministry. And I want to thank Tilly and Catherine and Jonathan for their readings and leadership, both in the planning and execution of our liturgies, as well as all they do to make this place called Sardis go and go and go. Most of all, I want to offer a word of thanks to each of you. It is because of you that we are able to do this thing called corporate worship. It is good to be the people of Sardis Baptist Church, and it is even better to be together this morning to offer a word of thanks to a good and benevolent and peaceful and creative and wonderful God. Our lesson this morning is a familiar psalm, Psalm 133. I'm actually going to read it out of the Pew Bible this morning. If you have one handy, it's page 375, page 575 in your Old Testament. Psalm 133, a song of ascents. Hear now these good words. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down upon the beard, on the beard of Aaron, running down over the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord ordained his blessing, life forevermore. Sardis Baptist Church, these are good words from a good God. For you, a good people. Thanks be to God. Our sermon this morning is entitled, Life is Good. A lot of times, worship at Sardis Baptist Church is hypoallergenic. That is to say, our sense of smell is one that we rarely incorporate into our weekly liturgies. Of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We live in a world full of products and consumable goods that are not made of organic components. And too often, these non-organic components cause really bad side effects for our community members. Chemicals, perfumes, oils, and other substances can be life-choking and life-draining. Therefore, hypoallergenic worship has real theological merit. It's a statement of care and concern and accessibility for all of our community members. We also don't use or don't have a lot of incense at Sardis Baptist Church. Again, this is probably not a terrible thing for our congregation, given our sporadic adventures with unruly candle flames. But hypoallergenic worship may inhibit us from understanding the meaning behind the psalmist's depiction of precious oil in today's text. In ancient Israel, anointing oil was precious because it was both refreshing and sweet-smelling. There's a great TV commercial out right now where a young woman says, I told my friend, girl, you need to try some Dove. The camera pans to a person in a refreshing shower with symmetrical splashes of water and smooth, creamy soap. Those splashes, by the way, are more symmetrical than I've ever been able to create. And we envision and we sense a restorative act. I think all of us, especially during a steamy August, can identify with a cleansing shower, complete with a pleasing, pure body wash. You choose the scent or lack thereof. The psalmist is not asking us to think about an old man with a soggy beard. The psalmist is conjuring up the image of a generous, sweet, anointing spirit of God. It's the same spirit we seek to sense and recreate with our use of baby oil to anoint our children on dedication days, and to soften the harshness of dusty ashes at the beginning of each Lenten season. So, I want to ask you to do me a favor this morning. I want to see if you can hang on to these images of sweet smelling and restorative oil. Okay, I'm going to change gears for just a minute. I talk about my lawn now and again, maybe too much for this congregation's liking, but my lawn is a rich source of imagery. I've been working hard on it, and one day soon, I'm really going to enjoy rubbing my bare feet on soft, green, gentle blades of Bermuda grass. A few days ago, I ventured outside in the midday heat, optimistically barefooted, only to feel sharp, brittle, unfriendly, needle-like blades on my soles. Was I walking on pine needles? I was disappointed, but not deflated. But yesterday, though, with a little less optimism, I ventured out earlier in the morning, barefoot once more, to water a few plants. To my great surprise, the thick morning dew had softened and replenished the lawn, and the grass gave way to my steps, providing a soft, cool, wet, generous padding for my soles. And the dew was so thick, my tracks hardly depleted it. This morning, the psalmist tells us about Mount Hermon's dew. Mount Hermon straddles the border of Israel and Syria, some distance from Jerusalem, maybe not quite as far as Mount Mitchell from Charlotte, but still, it's a good ways. The dew on this highest peak, much like the dew on Mount Mitchell does for Charlotte, provides water and life for Jerusalem. The psalmist wants us to again imagine something that is restorative and refreshing. But in this instance, this something is also generous and expansive. Okay, so I went backward instead of forward with my illustrations of this psalm, but I hope by now you can picture or sense things that are sweet smelling and restorative, like anointing oil, and that you can also picture things that are generous and expansive and life-giving, like the mountain dew. With that in mind, the psalmist proclaims, how very sweet smelling, how very restorative, how very generous, how very expansive, how very life-giving it is when kindred live together in unity. How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. Kindred are people, sisters and brothers of one nature and accord. I would say that they are people connected by the same substance. That is the word or the energy or the oomph or the DNA of God. And those kindred live in unity. Unity, a condition of harmony. Think about barbershop quartets. Unity, a pleasing arrangement of parts. Think about what each person in this community adds to our whole. Or unity, an interweaving of narratives. Think about the unique story that God has for each one of us. How good and pleasant it is when God's people dwell together in unity. In unity, not as clones, not as an assimilated culture, not as conformists, not as subordinates, but in unity as collaborators. Now, when I was growing up, Charlie Daniels used to sing a song called Uneasy Rider about the elevation of Brother John's version. But I find wholeness in the give and take of all four Gospels, not to mention the ones that aren't canonized. And I know that the world, especially what we see of it from broadcast and digital media, wants to tailor our sources, bombard us with content that mimics our opinions. Even Google knows what I want to ask before I can even finish typing it in. But I think we can be more complete when we explore and engage differences rather than running from them. And I don't know about you, but what I appreciate the most about our chancel choir is how they take a dozen different voices and blend them together for one purpose. How generous, how full of life, how life-giving it is to hear Hillary, and to hear Becky, and to hear Rick, and to hear Susan, and to hear Danny, and to hear Melissa, and to hear Kristen, and to hear Ruthie, and to hear Debbie, and to hear Billy, and to hear Jonathan, and to hear Jim, and to hear Irina, and to hear Tim, and to hear others. I hope I haven't omitted anyone. To hear each one of them sing together. I hear one voice, but if I concentrate and watch individuals, I can hear their distinct gifts as well. Their voices, to me, are like oil running off of Aaron's beard and robe. Their voices are like dew making its way down to the Catawba and Yadkin River valleys toward the fertile Piedmont. I suppose I'm rambling, but you'll have to forgive me. I'm in the meeting house, and even if it is hypoallergenic, all of this imagery is engaging my senses. So what I'm trying to get at with this morning's sermon is this. I think we often have little trouble seeing the unity of collective differences when we see such differences in music, or in literature, or in mathematical equations, or in the colors of a rainbow, or in the parts of an ecosystem. Somehow, some way, we see the beauty of independent, unique parts working interdependently. I think what the psalmist is seeking to remind us, of this morning is of God's intended purpose for God's communities. God's communities are composed of unique creatures, all bound together by shared createdness in a loving creator, all expressing themselves in their uniquely created ways. And I believe that it's this consortium, this collaboration, this partnering of varied gifts that makes God's communities thrive. In God's communities, dialogue isn't dangerous, it's generous. In God's communities, diversity isn't limiting, it's expansive. In God's communities, unique gifts aren't an acquired taste, they smell sweet to all palates. In God's communities, interdependence isn't exhausting, it's renewing and refreshing. God's community doesn't zap life or remove life. God's community breeds life. Some years ago, the psalmist penned these thoughts in the days of pilgrimage songs. Travelers made their way to the sacred space once more. They came from different places. They spoke with different tongues and different accents. They had varied skills and varied stories. But these pilgrims, these travelers, stepped in unison. And as they approached Jerusalem, they saw the same hills and the same temples on the horizon. They put their faith in the same procurer of love and grace. Maybe it was the sweet-smelling oil. Maybe it was the ample dew. Maybe it was the inertia of the Spirit. Maybe it was the power of spontaneous community. Maybe it was all of these things. But somehow, some way, God ordained God's blessing amongst and amidst God's people. Life forevermore. This morning, I suppose we're on a journey too, though it's a virtual one. We have different devices and we have different bandwidths and we have different temperaments, and some of us may still be in our pajamas. But as we seek the sacred one in emerging spaces and places, we bring different tunes and different voices and different stories and different gifts and different perspectives. In such a virtual whirlwind, may God give us the patience and the strength and the understanding and the love to harmonize our differences into community in order that we too might value God's deepest ordained blessing. Life forevermore. Friends, may it be so, and may it be soon.